कुछ महीनों के, बहुत सालों की बात नहीं कर रहा हूँ मैं, बहुत करंट डेटा और बहुत करंट रिपोर्ट्स की बात करूँगा। एक न्यूज़ रिपोर्ट पब्लिश हुई थी। That news report was based on the RBI report, which said that between 2008-9 and 2018-19, there has been an improvement in labor productivity. Okay, in all sectors. Okay, कि लेबर प्रोडक्टिविटी, लेबर गुणवत्ता में एक इम्प्रूवमेंट हुआ है। और जो इंटरेस्टिंग बात वो रिपोर्ट ये भी बता रही थी, जो आप ये कहती है कि ये जो इम्प्रूवमेंट ऑफ प्रोडक्टिविटी है, वो प्रोडक्टिविटी कैपिटल के शेयर के इन्वेस्टमेंट से बढ़ने से नहीं हुआ। नाउ दैट्स अ वेरी इंटरेस्टिंग पॉइंट कि इनफैक्ट द डेटा सेज दैट आउट ऑफ द 27 सेक्टर्स दैट दे लुक्ड एट, सिर्फ 5 सेक्टर है जिसमें ये दिखता है कि कैपिटल का इन्वेस्टमेंट का शेयर बढ़ा है। बाकी सारे सेक्टर्स में एक्चुअली कैपिटल इन्वेस्टमेंट का शेयर जो है वो डिक्लाइन हुआ। नाउ इंटरेस्टिंग बात ये है कि आप एक तरफ देख रहे हैं कि लेबर प्रोडक्टिविटी जो है वो हमेशा ये कहा जाता है कि वो विद कैपिटल इंटेंसिव, आप बढ़ाते हैं उसको तो उससे आप क्या होता है, ज़्यादा मशीनें लगाते हैं, यू ब्रिंग इन मोर मैकेनाइजेशन एंड दैट विद मैकेनाइजेशन द प्रोडक्टिविटी इंक्रीजेस। नाउ दैट्स it's a contradiction that you do not have a investment in the capital share, increase of capital share, but yet you have an increase in labor productivity. Now, add to that another, it's all from the same report. It also says that in all these sectors, actually, employment has fallen. There has been a rate decline in employment. Now, that's another very interesting thing. Labor productivity is increasing, capital share is declining, but labor employment is also falling. Now, in a sense, there is a very natural path that any one of you have done Marxist political economy would understand that yes, with increasing labor productivity, actually the obvious thing is that the employment will fall. That's very, very sort of true, and that's what Marxist political economy tells you. That you जो पूरा debate on labor productivity जो चलता है, how kind of crude that debate is. So और not only that the employment has fallen, but also ये भी उसमें कहा जा रहा है कि जो उसके लिए हमारे पास डेटा है, जो मैं अभी बात करूँगा थोड़ी देर बाद, that जो वेजेस है उसका शेयर भी काफी डिक्लाइन हो रहा है। अब आपका एम्प्लॉयमेंट भी घट रहा है, वेज शेयर भी घट रहा है, कैपिटल इन्वेस्टमेंट नहीं हो रहा है, लेकिन प्रोडक्टिविटी इंक्रीज हो रही है। नाउ आई एम जस्ट थिंकिंग, आई एम आस्किंग यू टू थिंक कि क्या हो सकता है। ठीक है, एक पैराडॉक्स में यहाँ पर आपको पहले स्टॉप करूँगा। दूसरा, now I am trying to tell you about the other side of the story. Other side of the story is कि आप न्यूज़पेपर उठाओ, आप देखो, most of the time you will keep on finding, आप कोई भी business news ले लो, most of the time you will find that you are being reported that this company has done very well, this quarter it has jumped, even during the COVID pandemic, their profit share has increased. Now, अब इसके ऊपर आप देखो और उसके बाद उसी को आप एनालाइज करो कि जो कॉर्पोरेट टैक्सेस हैं वो जो है उस पर जो है वो फ्लक्चुएट होता रहा है मोर और लेस। उसका आप डेटा सुनोगे तो यू विल बी शॉक्ड, समथिंग अराउंड 2003-4-5 में इट वाज समवेयर अराउंड 35+%, वो जाकर के 2018-19 में इट हैज बीन रिड्यूस्ड टू 25.7। So 2018-19 में 1920 आप देखते हैं कि there is a steep fall in the corporate taxes. Now ये एक इंटरेस्टिंग बात है कि आप प्रॉफिट शेयर आपका इंक्रीज हो रहा है, टैक्स रेट आपके ऊपर कम हो रहा है, और जो इफेक्टिव टैक्स रेट अगर आप देखेंगे तो वो तो और भी बहुत ज़्यादा कम होता है। और इंटरेस्टिंग ये है कि फॉर फर्म्स हु हैव हायर प्रॉफिट रेट्स, that is more than 100 crores, उनके ऊपर the effective tax rate is the lowest. Okay, so that's one interesting paradigm. And then you start, look at these two situations, these two realities, and then also look at the other condition in which you will find that जो आप सब follow कर रहे होंगे, the rate of unemployment. Okay, इंक्रीजिंग। आप एक वेज वाला शेयर आपने देखा, वेज डिक्लाइन, जो लेबर शेयर है, लेबर एम्प्लॉयमेंट वो गिर रहा है। बट अभी के कॉन्टेक्स्ट में आप देखो कि जो अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट, ओपन अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट रेट है, दैट हैज गॉन हाईएस्ट इन द लास्ट 5 decades. ओके, इट हैज टच्ड roughly around 6.1% in 18-19, और उसका शेयर जो है जो अर्बन में देखेंगे तो वो है 7.8% और रूरल में 5.3% है। नाउ और इसका एक खास इंटरेस्टिंग पहलू ये है कि इस ओपन अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट में देयर इज अ प्रोग्रेसिव एक्सक्लूजन ऑफ दोज हु आर लेस एजुकेटेड। ओके, लेस एजुकेटेड का तो प्रोग्रेसिव एक्सक्लूजन है, बट दैट डजंट मीन इस ओपन अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट में दोज हु आर more educated are not being affected. In fact, if you look at the sort of unemployment rate, then you will find that those with the tertiary education are the highest impacted, and their sort of unemployment is very high. Now that is there, and then very recently, although I don't want to quote the source because I am too skeptical of using that data source, that is CMIE. But in the evidence of there is no other source available at the moment, क्योंकि आपकी regime जो है वो सर्वे करेगी नहीं, और अगर करेगी तो वो छुपा कर रखेगी, वो डिलीट जो भी आप देख रहे हैं वो एक्चुअली लीक्ड रिपोर्ट्स हैं, दे आर नॉट रिलीज्ड रिपोर्ट्स। ओके, PLFS 1819 हो, उसके बाद में अब जब लीक हो ही गया तो रिलीज भी किया विद सर्टेन क्वालिफायर्स एंड ऑल ऑफ इट। बट CMI का रिपोर्ट है कि इन द लास्ट 5 years more than 2 crore people have actually left the workforce, that they are not even seeking employment. Okay, now you have seen that there is this 3 layers of thing that I have quoted. Okay, on the one hand, productivity is increasing, employment share is falling, capital tax rate is declining, those with the highest profit is being the least taxed, and then subsequently you look at the open unemployment rate that is there. So how do we understand this paradox? And that's for this. Of course, all of you have answers. I'm sure many of you have answers, but I just want to take you to a little bit in the sort of history and try and understand this paradox. And I think that you can't have anything better than what Marx said, that if you understand the capitalist accumulation process, it is the accumulation process itself which kind of constantly produces a sort of relatively redundant working population. Okay, now what does it mean by redundant working population? That a population which is superfluous for the capital's average requirement for its own valorization. Okay, which means that it is a relative surplus population. And it is this relative surplus population which actually is a constant sort of a nature, constant need for the capitalism to survive. Without that, it can't. Now, how do we look at it? I mean, this was an idea which marched in the times, which was dominated by industrial capitalism. Right now, ever since then, Marx himself, and then subsequently the Marxists who followed Marx and wrote and interpreted the world, they when they started sort of writing, when this idea marched, what Shawari was talking about, that there was this whole attempt and try to raise the consciousness of people, trying to understand and unite them, that you find that it was kind of the capitalism was made to at least acknowledge that they won't survive if they do not address this particular issue and the problem. And hence you see that in its way to for survival, they invent a new form of capitalism, which is basically known as the regulated capitalism, which comes to you as a form of welfare state. Right. Now, in this welfare state, what you find that exactly the opposite what I was talking now, that it was that the rich were taxed more for some period of time, and they were taxed more to sort of fulfill the needs of the larger relative surplus population that you have. And it is that phase, which is marked by change in the production regime, which we know as Fordism and all of those. I don't want to get into that because यहाँ पे कई लोग हैं जो Fordism के बारे में and it will be difficult for me to take into that direction. But a regulated capitalism in which capitalism is, of course, the state is there to facilitate that accumulation process, but it also gains a kind of sort of relative autonomy that it talks about in terms of managing the conflict that was arising because of the raising consciousness, because of the demand that workers were putting on capitalism. But and you know, it is best described by what Gramsci in his Prisoner books writes, that hegemony here is born in the factory. And you can understand that what does he mean by hegemony, why is he choosing this factory, where is he trying to sort of explain that. Now, but unfortunately, this little compromise also, that that capitalism was made to force in this, during the regulative phase, was actually not acceptable to the so-called, capitalist model. And hence, you find that there began, and it could not live for long. It began in the early, 20th century, and then it could not move beyond the World War II. And then subsequently, what you have that there is a march again of a different decade of the 1970s, when all that you saw that was probably done or said during the regulated phase of capitalism was put to an end and marked to an end. And what was projected, what was being told with a double-edged sword was that all that was being done through regulated capitalism is not good for capitalism, and it's not good for the world as a whole, because they started once again trying to bring in this whole idea of laissez-faire capitalism, trying to, although it was very different from the classic one, but they wanted to tell that that there was this word of globalization, and with that globalization there was this coined word about neoliberalism, जिसके बारे में आप सब पढ़ रहे हैं, जानते हैं. But उसमें जो key word था, that key word in that neoliberalism and globalization was the idea of deregulation. Okay. Now the idea of deregulation actually was propagated as if it is an idea of expansion of freedom. Okay. No doubt that yes, it is an idea of expansion of freedom, but the question is very important: of whom? It is of course an expansion of freedom of the capital. But when you come to the labor, then actually deregulation is actually not deregulation. Deregulation is actually re-regulation at the whims and fancies of the capital, and hence it amounts to what is the loss of whatever rights the labor has achieved in those previous years through its struggle that Shorey was talking about. I don't even say it as a loss of labor freedom, because the question of whether the labor is free in the capitalist world is itself a debated one, and I'm on the side where I find that the labor has never been free, and it is absolutely always unfree, even in this capitalist age. So, so that is what you see in the last, so particularly in the last 5 decades, as far as the world is concerned, but certainly in the last 3 decades, in the Indian context, you see that there is a growth of the complete insecurity of workers, and be it is employment, be it in terms of social security, or even their personal, right? So so that is where what Shorey was talking about, that there is a space which was already very small of the so-called formal work. I mean, अब ये debate भी बड़ा, it's a very sort of difficult and a different debate. I don't want to go into again formal versus informal, because ये सब जो मेरे students बैठे हैं वो will get bored about how formal and informal की जो binary है, how do we define that, how do we look at it. So, but what I would say certainly is that the small space of so-called formal work जो generate किया था capitalism ने for its own benefit, even that space started shrinking. And what you have is that there is a global growth of informal working class, informal employment, even in those small formal sectors. And to quote the recent data of ILO, you will find that almost 60 to 70% of the total world employment is actually informal. And it is the informal working class which is the fastest growing and most unprecedented social class on earth at the moment. Okay, so now and here I think what you will realize that therefore it is in this context that there has been a revival, not just in the global south. Global south may Marx has been always relevant, but particularly in the global north about the ideas of Marx. Why is it being sort of said and reread and understood again and again in the last 30-40 years? It is because that the relevance that he is so relevant, what he wrote in his manuscript, then is very, very important. But here we have two stories, and the story is that we have one good and one other is bad. So I'll start first with the bad story and then I'll go to the good story. The bad story is that today's present age capitalism is not driven by industrial capital. Present age capitalism is actually driven by, which all of you know, is finance, and more recently into digital and data. Okay, now which is very different from the days of the past. Okay, but the good part, the good story is that it is again being driven only because there is no other purpose which can drive and sustain capitalism. That is profit, that is surplus. And how do they sort of do? So surplus, as you know, is only generated by the exploitation of workers, right? How do they do so? They keep on squeezing the necessary time of the workers and expanding the surplus time of the workers. Okay, that's the major thing. Up is so what you do basically, that now you connect that to the first part. That when you say that the profit share is increasing, so basically when you say that the profit share is increasing, or even if it doesn't increase, even if it remains the same, all profit actually is nothing but a theft. And when I say theft, it actually is theft, because you are stealing the value that the workers add on each commodity, which you are transforming that into your surplus and profit. So and that is what constitutes exploitation. So whether it is the industrial capitalism or it is digital and the data capitalism, everything is being driven solely by this purpose of generating profit. And every profit actually is a theft. Don't take it sort of lightly. It is actually a theft. And for I think this crowd doesn't need to explain what does surplus in this condition mean. What does exploitation here means when I'm saying so. Now, what do we and when I say that, don't see that I don't use, no one use, and it's not actually a pejorative term. It is actually the objective definition on which capitalism survives and capitalism is defined. So there is actually no alternative within capitalism. There is actually no alternative within capitalism that would allow capitalists to make profits. Okay, the only motive, only way to make profit within capitalism is stealing from workers. I already said that how do they do so? So what you see here, that whether it is the industrial capitalism or it is the data or digital capitalism, exploitation is the universal feature of the capitalist economy. Okay. I don't, as I said, need to explain why I'm saying it is a theft, but constant accumulation only for the sake of accumulation is what drives and keeps capitalism alive. When you read a news report, you should be very careful in reading when you say that this profit of this particular company has increased and what it is all about. Now I want to come and connect that to which is the third part of the lecture. I'm sorry if I'm taking longer, but the third part of the lecture is about this attack, this whole phenomena of what we are sort of trying to understand as labor reforms, or of elimination of all the abolition of all the labor laws, and then clubbing them as 4 labor codes. Now, it is the very populist reason why this regime is saying so, and what it uses to sell this, and why it needs labor reform, is that it tells you that this is all the labor laws are very rigid, and it is the reason, therefore, that because of that rigidity, industries need the right to hire, and if it hires actually, then it tries to bypass those laws and does it in such a way that the laws do not apply on them. I think you need to think that if the laws were so rigid, once again to the point that we were making earlier, that if the laws were so rigid, why did the share of labor in the GDP fall? Okay, and I'm giving you the data. In 1980s, the share of labor in GDP was roughly more than a quarter, 28.5%. In 1991, the share of labor in the GDP declined to 21.4. In 1999, 2000, 2001, it decreased to 15.5, and in 2010-11, it decreased to 10.3. There is no data now which I can quote of 18-19, but it certainly is declined, as you know, given from different estimates that we have. Now, so what is being said now? The whole word again about reform. I think I want to pause a little and try and see that how there is a whole dimension to understand what does reform here mean. Reform once again here actually is what is to be understood as deregulation. And as I've already said to you, when it is about deregulation and when it comes to labor, it actually is about re-regulation. It is not deregulation. And this re-regulation of reform is happening on the whims and fancies of the capital and is at the cost of all the labor rights that you have. So it is the whole motive is to force towards more and more centralized capitalism, and which is I would not hesitate to say that it is actually against the very preamble of the Indian Constitution. This whole idea of a centralized capitalism. And why do I say so? Because if you read the preamble along with the directive principles of state policy, it has said that the state should act against the concentration of wealth in individual hands. Now, what is happening here is that just the opposite. The state is here facilitating the accumulation of wealth and is actually attacking the rights of labor. Right? So how far we are okay in terms of calling this as a labor reform is something that we have to engage. What we are attacking is not the accumulation of or concentration of wealth in the hands of few. What we are attacking is the minimum wage. Right? Now, even in the so-called golden days of what we were talking just now about regulated capitalism, what we celebrate the most is the idea of minimum wage. Now, that itself is a very striking thing. Why minimum wage? Right? Now, that's very important to understand this. But why shall we talk about minimum wage? Now, if you look at again the directive principles of state policy, the Constitution, it talks about the living wage. Now, living wage is very different from a minimum wage, right? But the fact is that if you look at the labor codes, new codes, it is an attack on even that minimum wage because it is talking about a new floor wage, which can be lower than the minimum wage, where there is a no formula set for how you will decide the floor wage, and the power to set the floor wage has been given to the union government and not to the state. Now, the labor is a state structure. Yet, floor wage will be decided by the union government. Now, so in a state, even if your state law or act gives a better, higher minimum wage, You can actually employ people with the floor wage set by the union government, and you will get a respite. That okay, fine, I'm following that floor wage. So in all of this, what is there, where the attack is now, I have told you, and I'm trying to ask you to reconnect with it. I mean, don't look at these as independent. What we discussed in the second phase, what we discussed about in the beginning. I told you about the paradox, and I'm asking you to reconnect that paradox, like how this is happening. Now, an interesting point is that, I mean, of course, the courts have never been very supportive of the labor rights. You know that even today, trade unionism has not been accepted as a fundamental. The right to association is a fundamental right. Yet, trade unionism has not been accepted as a fundamental right, and there are court judgments on it. But there are people who argue that in the earlier phase. There is another very interesting case of 1954, five-judge bench, constitutional bench in Edward Mills versus the state of Ajmer, have told that once again it was also trying to settle what minimum wage should be, and it said that if enterprises or employers do not employ people on minimum wage, then actually those enterprises should be closed. Now, but as I said, right to association has not been accepted as a fundamental right. And that's a very sort of a critical. But the argument goes that in the early days of after independence, what was the nature of Indian state was that it was more of a social democratic, Fabian democracy and all of those. So the Nehruvian framework was trying to look at and look after, and you have several acts being enacted, whether it is all these laws that you are seeing now being repealed, being withdrawn, being abolished, are primarily all laws made during that time, and hence the state, the courts took a different view. But now, when the state has abdicated its responsibility, when the state's nature has changed, I think there was a need for the courts to look at it differently. But unfortunately, that is not happening. It is, in fact, going in the reverse direction, and hence, you won't find too many judgments, which would support the demands of the labor. Now, so what is happening is that, as I said, that there is a growing class of informal workers worldwide, and in this particular context, what is happening is that there is every year, every day, every now and then, there is an effort to trivialize or to look at definitions which defines formality or formal sector in a very narrowest ways. Okay, at times you are said that even if you are an employee of this was in 1718. You look at the economic survey, you will find that it says that even if you are, or look at the budget document, you will find that even if you are employed by an enterprise which is under GST, then all you are informal. Whether I am getting the so-called minimum wage, right, or whether I am getting social security, whether I am getting job security or work security, no, nothing. If you are part of that, then you are there. Okay, I am talking about now during the COVID, SBI released a report. Okay, what did it use? It used a provision of digital inclusion. That if you are participating, if you are getting your salary through digital payment and all of those, then you are all for. So what is happening is that new twists and new trivialization is happening in terms of defining and understanding, and hence you will find different data, different sets coming every time. But the fact of the matter is that your open unemployment is telling you a different reality. Your share, if you analyze from 2004, from where data on different sectors are available, you will find that there is a there is a stagnation of, if you define social security into two parts, whether it is job security or it is about social security. And if you try and see that if both these two merge, then there will be a 45-degree line that in the Indian case never appeared to be merged. So either you have job or you have, and in most cases you do not have job security. The social security is more because of the old enacted laws, whether it is the EPF Act, whether it is the ESIC Act, and many other acts that we were sort of talking about. So because of that, there are more people covered in the Social Security Act, but there is absolutely no. So if you look at the data, you will find that there is a complete decline of people with job security in the formal sector. Okay, and there is absolutely no increase in people with even Social Security. So that means it is telling you very clearly that the total secure job and total employment is fall within. So there is a larger informalization of the formal sector, which is very, very crucial to understand why this labor kind of reform is happening. Okay. Now, what is important in this particular certain other points that is very, very important when you look at these labor codes. That at a time, remember that this discussion started in 2016 when certain states started using this word called labor reform and started changing the labor laws. Maharashtra, Uttar Pradesh, Rajasthan, not Uttar Pradesh in 2016, Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, and Gujarat. If you look at what happened after that, after those reforms, you will find that precariousness has increased. So on the one hand, they are saying that because of the rigidity, they are not hiring. Here it is that they are reforming the law, yet precariousness is increasing in those states. But most striking part was that in 2000, when did they really started working on this? When the workers were forced out of their houses, out of their employment during the pandemic. It is then that they started thinking of so-called labor reforms. Okay? When these workers were left as non-citizens of this country, if the labor codes and labor laws were so rigid, if we had the Interstate Migration Act so rigid, which is they are saying that we need to reform and bring it, why could enterprises, why did not take care of the workers if it was so rigid? Why everyone was forced out on the street as a non-citizen without food, traveling on thousands of miles on their food? And we have seen all. Many of you have actually worked during those days, so I don't need to sort of talk about it. So, what is it that we need to sort of understand in this? Now, another important point is that, as I said, that although trade unionism has not been accepted as a fundamental right, yet there was a possibility, there was trade unions happening and trade unions were recognized. Trade unions were sort of an important part of the life of workers. But what it does now is that this particular labor codes that it actually makes trade unions and strikes in particular completely illegal. Now, there are very few countries in the world where strikes have been made illegal. The trade union rights the code says that it has to be recognized by the employer. Now, if the trade union has to be recognized by the employer, and then there are also different states are also increasing the threshold from 15% of the total workers. Now they are saying 30% of the total workers. Now all this is done to manipulate the trade union. So if you want recognition, then you should act as I say. And where do I tell you? The example is us. I told you today we had a whole day discussion. Recognition. We don't recognize you. Teachers association, we don't recognize. So recognition has become a mark. So how do we sort of do that? Now in terms of when we say strike being made illegal, what do we mean? The strikes were, if you look at the history, you'll find that there are two kinds. One is that the public utility strikes in the public utility enterprises, and then in the non-public utility. Now, in the public utility enterprises, you have to have to give a notice for the strike. Now that is being made mandatory for all. So even for the non-public utility, you will have to sort of give. So what to see that there is a complete attack. It is an onslaught on the labor rights, which the labor achieved through a long struggle that Shari was talking about. That we have just witnessed. That how and why. Of course, it is a never-ending battle because you know that within the system of production that we have, this capitalist accumulation, there is absolutely no freedom for workers. You are bound to be employed. But within that, what the labor have struggled, what they had sort of achieved was through its own struggle that way. But this particular sort of attempt to repeal those 44 laws and to have merged into 4, because laws were defined in different ways. There are particular laws and there are general laws. So sector-specific laws, all of those are being finished. Now it's all general law, and therefore, so whether you look at all the codes, you will find that it's a complete attack on the collective bargaining of the workers, and that is something which we have to be very aware of. Now, I thought that I will try and speak about what's the way out and how do we go about, but we have some codes with us, who's going to eliminate us on that. But I think one has to understand in terms of the relevance of what Marx had talked about. That, I think if you would try to look for a solution, look for a solution of within the boundaries, within the framework of the nation states, then there is always a problem with this. Okay. But if you try and look for that a worker anywhere is a worker everywhere, and then try to look at a solution, probably there is a possibility of a solidarity, and there is a need to break the north-south divide and go. How are we going to do that? Is it really possible? That's a long debate that we can have one more session. But I think one very important component that is important for us to keep in mind is that if we keep looking for answers in the framework of the boundaries in the nation state, then we always tend to believe that we cannot stop but a race to the bottom, which is actually happening. If we want to stop the race to the bottom, then we have to think of international solidarity. We have to think beyond north-south or any other divide and think of international collaboration.